The movie begins with a young woman named Violet walking through the streets of a bustling city. She looks around and off for quite a while before heading back to a massive estate, which happens to be her workplace. Once there, Violet rushes towards her late father's office in search of something important. It turns out that Violet's father, Eric Chappelle, was actually a renowned perfumer who was engrossed in creating a unique perfume formula. However, due to his unexpected passing, the formula was left incomplete. This caused Violet to return back to her father's perfumery in order to take upon the role of CEO, whilst also working to complete the perfume's composition. Moving forward, as soon as Violet enters her father's office, she begins looking around for the perfume formula. She goes through all of Eric's belongings, reminiscing her beautiful childhood memories in the process. She then finds his diary, which consists of all of his notes. Now ecstatic, Violet starts searching for the formula. But much to her dismay, she ends up finding out that some of the diary's pages have been ripped out. Violet immediately starts looking around for the missing pages. One of her co-workers, Kimmy, even offers to join in and look for the formula. The two talk about their lives and jobs while searching the entire office. During the conversation, Kimmy asks her if she will move back to Belgium permanently in order to continue her father's business. However, Violet replies that she still has a lot of work to do in Boston and probably won't quit her job just yet. After a brief conversation, Kimmy goes back to her job. Meanwhile, a very stressed Violet continues looking around for the formula. To make matters worse, her boyfriend, Stefan, who also happens to be a financial analyst, informs her that they need to make the perfume as soon as possible. He adds that multiple companies have already contacted them for it and want to sell it during Valentine's Day. This causes Violet to sigh in frustration. She gets really anxious because the incomplete perfume was actually part of a trilogy set that her father had spent his whole life producing. If she can't create the last perfume in time, then the entire trilogy set could fail. Stefan soon notices Violet's anxiety, so he comforts her by saying that at least they have a small sample of the perfume. Through thorough research, they could break down the ingredients for the fragrance and recreate it. However, that's when Violet explains that her father's blends are way too complex for a machine to accurately break down the components. Upon hearing this, Stefan suggests that they hire a perfumer to get accurate results, but Violet refuses to do so. She asserts that they don't have a lot of time. Thus, they'll have to recreate the formula themselves. Eventually, Stefan leaves the perfumery to take care of some errands. On the other hand, Violet goes to the perfume lab and proceeds to create multiple fragrance samples. She tries to replicate her father's blend, but fails miserably. Now distraught, she realizes that none of her mixtures smell anything like Eric's sample. Shortly after, Kimmy approaches Violet and informs her about all her upcoming meetings. The latter thanks her for the heads up, and then walks out of the lab. Since she had been working all day, Violet decides to grab a coffee in order to calm her nerves. However, as soon as she enters the cafe, she bumps into a man whose drink spills all over her outfit. Feeling guilty for the mess, the man offers to buy her a coffee. Violet initially refuses, but agrees nonetheless. The man, whose name happens to be Declan, quickly takes this opportunity to flirt with her. The two talk for quite a while before grabbing their drinks and parting ways. As Declan walks away, Violet stares at him with keen interest and smiles. Later that day, Violet returns back to the perfumery and learns that there's still no sign of the formula. Because of this, she decides to hire a couple perfumers in order to make the job a little easier. She meets multiple perfumers and tests their skills, but sadly, none of them prove to be impressive. Soon after, Violet starts to get really stressed. She receives multiple messages from her business partner, Harv Willard, who informs her that he needs to start shipping the trilogy set for Valentine's. He further adds that the perfume needs to be ready within a couple days. Right when she's about to give up, Violet suddenly remembers that Declan managed to accurately guess the scent on her clothes in a matter of seconds. She gets really excited by this and immediately goes back to the coffee shop. Once there, she asks the shop owner about Declan and gets his address. Violet then rushes to the address and starts looking around for Declan. It turns out that the latter is actually a botanist who works at a massive greenhouse. When Violet finally enters the place, she's thoroughly impressed by the numerous plants and flowers there. She then heads over to Declan and tells him that she had only touched a few apple blossoms on her way to the coffee shop and he had somehow smelled that on her. Violet further adds that his sense of smell is extremely good. That's when Declan responds by saying that since he's a botanist, he just knows a lot about plants. Eventually, Violet asks Declan to help her with her father's perfume. She asks him to smell the sample and name all of the components in it. Declan does so with ease, which makes Violet jump with joy. She profusely thanks him for his help and runs back to the perfumery. The very next day, while Violet is working on the perfume, Stefan approaches her and tells her that if they don't deliver the perfume soon, the perfumery will face catastrophic results. So, in order to prevent this mishap, he asks her to just add components that will make the perfume smell similar to Eric's. Violet immediately refuses to do so, and claims that this perfume is her father's last creation. She asserts that she has to do him, and her family's name, justice. A while later, Violet goes back to Declan's greenhouse and asks him to smell another sample. She then asks him the proportions in the blend. Declan is really confused by Violet's behavior and asks her what she's doing. Just when she's about to explain the situation, she gets a call from Stefan stating that Harv is furious. She is then told that the perfume has to be ready in 12 days, or else they will face some serious consequences. Whilst trying to stay calm, Violet tells Declan about her father's perfume. She then asks him if he'd like to work on the sample with her. Declan politely refuses the offer, but Violet remains adamant. She explains that his phenomenal sense of smell will help her fulfill a lifelong dream. But sadly, even after a lot of convincing, Declan refuses to work for the perfumery. Now devastated, Violet proceeds to walk out of the greenhouse. However, at that moment, she realizes that her necklace is missing. Violet immediately runs back inside the greenhouse and starts looking around for the necklace, ruining various flowers in the process. When the greenhouse owner sees this, he berates her for being so irresponsible. Violet profusely apologizes for her mistake and thankfully, Declan offers to take care of the mess. Later that night, whilst Violet is working on the perfume, she gets a call from Kimmy stating that Declan wants to meet her. Violet immediately runs down to the lobby and approaches Declan, who tells her that he's ready to take up the job. As expected, she happily hires him as a perfumer and welcomes him into the office. A while later, Violet excitedly informs Stefan that she has finally hired a perfumer. The latter congratulates her for the progress, but is caught off guard when he learns that Dec is actually a botanist who has no experience making perfumes. He tries to reason with her about hiring a professional perfumer, but Violet refuses. Now furious, Stefan asks Violet what her plan is. It's evident that he wants to go back to Boston with her. He tries to tell her that they should just deliver the perfume as soon as possible and go back to their original jobs. He even goes as far to explain that Olivia Kane, who happens to be the perfumery's biggest rival, wants to purchase it. Upon hearing this, Violet quickly turns down the offer and vows to never let her company down. The very next morning, Violet greets Declan and welcomes him into the perfumery. She tells him all about her father's achievements and his exquisite perfumes. She then takes him to the lab and shows him his workstation. Moments later, the two start working on various perfume notes. At one point, Violet walks out of the lab to take care of an emergency. Now alone, Declan starts to get bored, so he decides to roam around the perfumery. He soon comes across a beautiful spot with greenery all around. When Violet sees him there, she walks over to him and happily chats with him. The two bond over time and get closer than ever before. Whilst conversing, Declan tells Violet all about his love for plants. He explains that he's always felt close to nature and wants to spend his entire life studying it. Violet carefully listens to him and admires his love for all sorts of flora. After a while, Declan asks Violet about Eric's perfume sample, to which the latter replies that it is actually the most anticipated product from the perfumery. She then hands the sample to Declan, who takes a quick sniff and instantly understands the composition. Shortly after, both Violet and Declan head back to the lab and proceed to list out all the probable ingredients in the fragrance. Whilst working, the two are approached by Stefan, who immediately informs Declan that Violet is his girlfriend. He leaves shortly after, and Violet goes back to work, but that's when the sample vial falls to the ground and breaks. Violet instantly starts panicking, and proceeds to collect the small glass pieces off of the ground. Declan tries to comfort her, but she just snaps at him and asks him to leave. She then breaks down at the thought of losing her father's last creation. Now distraught, Declan slowly walks out of the perfumery, and surprisingly, runs into Olivia Kane. Olivia, whose only focus is to buy Eric's perfumery, politely chats with Declan in order to get him on her side. It's evident that she wants to stop the production of Eric's perfume, which will ultimately cause his perfumery to go bankrupt. That way, her competition would be reduced drastically, and her business would soar. Moving forward, Olivia offers Declan a ride and tries to hire him. She tells him that Violet is too big of a mess right now because of her father's passing. Because of this, the perfumery's future is not so bright. When Declan hears this, he immediately gets out of her car and refuses her offer. The next morning, Declan goes back to the perfumery and roams around the garden. Violet approaches him just then and apologizes for snapping at him. In response, Declan tells her that it's okay and offers her his condolences. Now emotional, Violet starts to fondly talk about all her favorite childhood memories with him. She then explains to Declan that the perfumery was her father's life. That is the reason why it's so important to her, and also why she can't sell the place. Eventually, Violet tells Declan that Olivia Kane has been plotting to buy her father's business for years. She explains that Kane is a cunning woman who made millions by copying other people's fragrance. However, she was never able to copy Eric's scents. Because of this, she is adamant about purchasing Eric's perfumery and creating her own brand in the process. When Declan hears this, he finally understands Olivia's true intentions, but decides to stay silent. Some time later, Declan and Violet head back to the lab and try to find the one missing component from the fragrance. They try multiple notes, but none of them seem to be working. At one point, Violet decides to grab some nut bars for lunch, which Declan strictly disapproves of. He quietly observes her routine life and asks her to live a little. Furthermore, he urges her to have fun and do things that make her happy. Violet is initially confused by Declan's suggestion, but after realizing that she basically exists like a robot, she agrees with him. She and Declan then leave the perfumery and head towards the city. Once there, the two roam around and eat all their favorite foods. They walk through the cobbled streets whilst talking about their childhood. Soon, both Violet and Declan realize that they have a lot in common. Their bond gets really strong, and as a result, the two love spending time with one another. Meanwhile, Stefan starts to get really bothered by the proximity between Violet and Declan. He feels as though Violet doesn't want to spend time with him anymore. Thus, when he realizes that his girlfriend is missing from the perfumery, he becomes extremely suspicious. On the other hand, after grabbing some lunch, Declan takes Violet to his greenhouse. There, he shows her all the beautiful flowers that are blooming, and tells her that he was the one who planted them all. Violet is thoroughly impressed by this, and also by the vast amount of knowledge that he possesses. She smiles at the beautiful scenery before her, and feels as though she's in heaven. Overcome with emotions, Violet thanks Declan for bringing her to the greenhouse. She then confesses that she misses her father a lot. That's when Declan comforts her, and even tries to kiss her. However, Violet pulls back immediately and runs away from him. This leaves Declan feeling hurt and heartbroken. In the meantime, Violet returns back to the perfumery and tries to get back to work. As soon as she walks into the lab, Stefan approaches her and asks her about her whereabouts. Violet just smiles at him and quickly brushes him off. Confused by the response, Stefan suggests that the two of them go out to dinner. Later that night, Stefan and Violet go to a beautiful restaurant. They talk for a while and discuss their progress with the perfume. Moving forward, Violet tries to hold a conversation with Stefan, but unfortunately the latter just ignores her and continues typing away on his phone. As a result, Violet feels ignored and unheard. She quickly realizes that Stefan isn't the man she fell in love with anymore. The next morning, Violet rushes into the perfumery and hurriedly gets back to replicating her father's sample. Declan arrives and starts working as well. Due to the recent events, the two completely ignore each other and just focus on their job. Later, whilst Declan is walking, Olivia Kane's card falls down from his jacket. Kimmy quickly notices this and asks him about it. Now concerned, Violet also starts interrogating him about his acquaintance with Olivia. Unable to dodge the question anymore, Declan finally confesses that Kane actually gave him a ride home. He further clarifies that he never told her anything about Eric's sample, and has always tried to avoid her at all costs. However, Violet and Stefan continue asking him all about Olivia. This causes Declan to get extremely annoyed. Furious, he tells Violet that he hasn't done anything wrong, and then storms out of the place. Soon after, Declan goes straight to his friend's coffee shop, and basically pours his heart out. There, he mocks Stefan for being so poised, and even complains about inhaling perfumes all the time. During all this, he starts coughing and sneezing a lot, and soon, his health rapidly declines. The following morning, Violet gets a call stating that Declan is extremely sick. Now more anxious than ever, she immediately drives up to his house and checks up on him. She then rushes to his side and gives him a bunch of medicine. That's when Declan realizes that Violet is not there for him, but rather to fix his nose. It's evident that all she wants is to recreate her father's perfume. Now heartbroken, Declan asks Violet if he means anything to her. In response, Violet apologizes for her behavior and explains that she's just really stressed because of the upcoming deadline. She then asks him to take care of himself and returns back to the perfumery. However, as soon as she leaves, Olivia Kane arrives at Declan's house. With a plan in mind, Olivia cheerily greets Declan and tries her best to bribe him. She brags about her massive family estate and even offers him a really nice job. She then asks Declan to hand over Eric's sample to her. However, Declan strictly refuses to do so. Olivia just grimaces at the answer and asks him to think about her job offer before leaving his house. The next morning, Stefan excitedly approaches Violet and tells her that he's found a very renowned perfumer to replicate the sample. He explains that the perfumer will help them create the fragrance within the given deadline. When Violet hears this, she tries her hardest to be happy, but all she can think of is Declan. Stefan suggests that they just ask Declan to leave, but Violet refuses to do so. She thinks for a very long time, and eventually decides to visit him. However, that's when Declan shows up at her house. Now surprised, Violet happily greets Declan and asks him to come in. The latter readily does so. But, as soon as he enters the place, a beautiful smell lingers around him. Declan immediately runs towards the source of the fragrance, and ends up in front of a rare tree. It turns out that the tree was imported and planted by Eric decades ago. Also known as the herb of apple, the tree's scent is the one missing component that Violet and Declan had been trying to find. Finally, after figuring out the composition of the perfume, the two run to the perfumery and immediately begin working. They spend all day and night creating different formulas to replicate the sample. Eventually, after what seems like an eternity, Violet and Declan manage to create an exact replica of Eric's sample. They jump around excitedly and celebrate their success. Sadly, their happiness doesn't last long, as Stefan soon approaches them with a new perfumer. He sneers at Declan and then proceeds to tell Violet that the perfumer is ready to recreate Eric's sample. When Declan hears this, he gets really upset and just walks away without saying a word. Feeling betrayed, he runs out of the perfumery. Right at that moment, he runs into Olivia Kane, who very cleverly tries to persuade him into joining her. She explains that Violet was just using him for her own gain. Declan feels as though Olivia's right and finally gives in to her demand. He hands her the formula for Eric's sample and then quietly goes back home. In the meantime, Olivia rushes back to her own lab and asks the perfumers there to start creating the fragrance. The head perfumer tries to intervene, but Olivia doesn't listen to him at all. On the other hand, an enraged Violet privately confronts Stefan about his behavior and tells him that she doesn't need a perfumer anymore. She further adds that, since Declan helped her create the perfume, she wants to give the entire credit to him. However, Stefan just laughs at this and proceeds with Declan's termination. Thankfully, Violet stands her ground and refuses to fire Declan. Back at Olivia's perfumery, the perfumers finally finish creating the fragrance. Now more excited than ever, Olivia immediately uses the perfume on herself. The head perfumer tries to stop her from doing so, but she completely ignores him. As a result, Olivia gets rashes all over her body. Surprisingly, it turns out that Declan gave her the wrong formula. He actually added poison oak as one of the components. When Olivia realizes this, she becomes furious and immediately begins planning her revenge. Meanwhile, Violet continues calling Declan in order to make things right. She tries her hardest to reach out to him and apologize, but ends up failing miserably. Shortly after, whilst Violet is preparing the launch for her perfume, she gets a call stating that the perfumery has flooded. Now panicking, she immediately rushes there and makes sure that all the employees are okay. Declan arrives at the scene as well. Together, they all try to think of a way to start packaging the perfume bottles. However, that's when Olivia arrives at the perfumery and cunningly tells Violet that she has already recreated Eric's perfume. The latter is shocked at this and asks her how she got her hands on the formula. In response, Olivia simply explains that Declan gave it to her. Violet is shocked at this and asks Declan for an answer. That's when Declan replies that he never actually gave Olivia the formula. He then explains that when Kane initially forced him to hand over the composition, he gave her an entirely wrong formula that would ultimately get her off his back. Sadly, the cunning Olivia ends up convincing Violet that Declan betrayed them all. As a result, Declan leaves the perfumery, hurt that no one really trusts him. He goes back to the greenhouse and thinks of all the moments that he spent with Violet. Finally, as a last resort, Declan goes back to the perfumery and tries to explain the entire situation to Violet. However, the latter just refuses to listen to him. Instead, she starts packing up to go back to Boston. Since the formula has already been leaked and time has run out, Violet is left with no other choice. Upon seeing this, Declan urges Violet to create her own formula. He begs her to continue her father's legacy instead of just abandoning it. Unfortunately, Violet just continues packing her bags. The very next day, Violet and Stefan get ready to leave for the United States. Right before leaving, Violet rants about how she was so excited about the perfume launch. She further explains that she wants to reformulate the perfume and finish her father's dream. Upon hearing this, Stefan just grimaces and tells her that reformulating and then distributing the perfume within 2 days is just impossible. He then goes on to say that the two of them should just go back to Boston and move on with their lives. That's when Violet explains that Declan gave her the idea to create her own perfume. Now furious, Stefan tells her that Declan is just a stupid botanist who only helped her find the apple blossoms. This comment takes Violet by surprise, because she never told Stefan the entire perfume formula. Now suspicious, she asks Stefan how he knows about the apple blossoms. Only she and Declan knew about the secret component to the fragrance, and since Stefan had only been helping them financially, the perfume formula was a well-kept secret. Stefan initially tries to lie his way out, but eventually, he admits that he saw the formula on Violet's laptop and sold it to Olivia. He explains that he was extremely jealous of Declan and just wanted him out of the way. So he gave Olivia the formula in order to paint Declan as the bad guy. The perfume's failure would also ensure Violet returning back to the States. Now heartbroken, Violet asks Stefan as to how he could betray her like this. In response, the latter says that he couldn't bear to see her falling in love with Declan, so he decided to sabotage everything. Upon hearing all this, Violet immediately breaks up with Stefan and rushes back to her perfumery. She then calls all her employees, including Declan, and starts preparing to reformulate the perfume sample. Moving forward, Violet assures Harv that all the perfume bottles will be distributed by Valentine's. She and her co-workers then invite all their family members to help them create the perfume within a very short period of time. Declan arrives at the scene with all his friends as well. When Violet sees him, she immediately apologizes to him and thanks him for his advice. Declan readily forgives her, and together, they get back to creating a unique formula. Whilst working, Violet explains to Declan that she has broken up with Stefan, and also reveals that she isn't going back to Boston anymore. As expected, Declan is delighted, and congratulates her for the bold decision. Eventually, Declan and Violet come up with a beautiful scent of their own. They ensure that Eric's formula is also incorporated in this new fragrance so as to pay their tributes to him. The two then name the perfume Heaven on Earth and quickly start packaging it. Everyone present there puts in all their effort, and finally, the entire shipment of perfume gets ready. The perfume bottles are then shipped to different parts of the country, and as expected, it sells out almost immediately. Both Violet and Declan celebrate this victory. The latter swiftly takes this opportunity to confess his feelings to Violet. He then kisses her passionately, and Violet happily reciprocates. The two finally realize their immense love for one another and begin dating. Soon, years pass by, and Heaven on Earth still remains one of the best perfumes on the market. As a result, Violet's perfumery reaches brand new heights. During all this, Declan and Violet's relationship becomes stronger than ever before. The movie finally ends with Declan proposing to Violet, who immediately says yes. The two then kiss passionately whilst awaiting a brand new chapter of their lives.